Welcome everyone to the fourth Women in Defence UK Challenge interview of 2023. I'm Angela Owen, founder of Women in Defence UK, and I'm delighted to be here with the Chief of the General Staff, General Sir Patrick Sanders. Welcome, Patrick.
Thank you for having me, Angela.
Born in Tidworth Garrison Military Hospital.
Yeah.
Raised in Norway, Gibraltar and Iraq, commissioned in '86 and spent your early service as an infantry officer in the Royal Green Jackets. In Germany, Norway and the United Kingdom. You've commanded on operations in Northern Ireland, Kosovo, Bosnia, Iraq and Afghanistan. Numerous staff appointments in operational and strategic roles. Been a member of the directing staff, a Joint Staff College, Pol Mill Advisor to the Commander of Coalition Forces in Iraq, Colonel Army Strategy, Chief of Defence Staff Liaison Officer to the US Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and ACDS Ops in the MOD.
We're going to run out of time if you go.
No, there's more. There's one particular bit I want to get to. Commanded 20 Army Brigade, 3 UK Div, Field Army and UK Stratcom. Chief of the General Staff from June last year. I am going to do a tiny bit more. You speak French, Arabic, colloquial Spanish, and can tell if you're being insulted in Arabic, Pashtun, Dari, Albanian and Serbo-Croat.
It's mostly in the intonation.
All right, okay. You enjoy all cycling, skiing, and you don't like Scotch eggs. We may come back to Scotch eggs later, but thank you and welcome. Welcome for being here. To the format of the session. So we'll start with an introduction from Lara Russell-Jones of Newton Europe, who are our Pankhurst Challenge partners, and as such, very kindly sponsored the event. After that, we'll get straight into one-on-one questions and discussion between CGS and myself. That will last about 30 minutes. The Q&A function on Teams will be open throughout, so if you have a question for CGS, please enter it via that route. We've got around 150 watching this morning. Please make sure your microphones and cameras are turned off. If you do want to put a question, it would be helpful if you could add your name and organisation. Sorry, we're not going to be able to ask them all, but we have had some fantastic questions in already, and hopefully we'll be able to weave some of those into the discussion. If you'd like to tweet, it's #WigChat at Women in Defence. Lara, over to you.
Thank you, Angela, and good morning, everyone. I'm Lara Russell-Jones, a director at Newton Europe, and we are delighted to be here as sponsors of the Women in Defence Challenge interview series. As Angela mentioned, this is the fourth and final challenge interview this year. As a quick recap, the first was with David Williams, MOD Permanent Secretary, on International Women's Day, discussing the encouraging progress that MOD has made on equality. Our second challenge interview was with Lieutenant General James Swift, former Chief of the Defence Staff, where we discussed the changes, development and challenges for women across defence. Our third and most recent challenge interview was with Major General Tom Buick at DSEI, where we discussed how the Army is addressing challenges in the recruitment process. All of these interviews are available to view through the Women in Defence UK website if you'd like to recap on them. Personally, it is fantastic to see the real change that is occurring within our sector, brought on through conversations and actions around diversity and inclusion. At the start of my career, individual role models were held up and celebrated. Now, quite a few years later, and as a mum of two, I am able to see talented role models all around me. I have the pleasure of routinely working with diverse teams, brought together through inclusive and flexible working practices. Within Defence, we still have a way to go on our EDI journey, but I think it's important to recognise the progress that has been made. At Newton, we are on our own journey to increase our diversity and make our culture as inclusive as possible. We believe we deliver the best outcomes to our clients when we bring together a wide-ranging group of people with different skills, thinking styles, backgrounds and experiences. We also believe in the importance of strengthening networks, representation and sponsorship, which is why we joined Women in Defence as a Pankhurst partner. We are proud to play our part in diversity across the defence enterprise, and we know that creating space for women to challenge, support and mentor each other through internal and external networks is critical to their growth and careers. I will now hand over to Angela, who will be interviewing General Sir Patrick Sanders this morning. I hope everyone enjoys the conversation that follows.
Thank you, Lara. Thank you very much. Patrick, it's surprisingly difficult to find an authoritative list of the responsibilities of CGS. Could you perhaps start by just explaining what the role is?
It's quite, it'd be quite long. So in simple terms, being CGS means that you're the professional head of the British Army. And if you think about it, sort of a number of different levels. So first of all, along with the other service chiefs and the vice chief and the chief of defence staff, we're all members of the Defence Council. So the sort of senior governing body, if you like, for the armed forces. I'm also a member of the Chiefs of Staff Committee. So in that capacity, I provide military strategic advice to the Secretary of State and to the CDS so that he can provide advice to the Prime Minister. So there's an operational element to it as well. And then I'm responsible for pretty much everything you see in the Army. So whether it's our workforce, recruiting and retaining, and ensuring people leave well, ensuring that we are equipped with the right capabilities that we need, ensuring that we're doing our training properly, ensuring that we sustain ourselves properly, looking after our infrastructure, and then perhaps most importantly, or pertinent to this conversation, ensuring that we've got the right culture as part of the institution. So that's a sort of brief summary, if you like, of what's a wonderful job. And thankfully, it's not a job I have to do on my own because I'm very, very ably supported by some brilliant senior officers, male and female, and some fantastic staff.
Thank you for that. Well, let's go straight into a question that plays into culture. It's a perennial and troubling topic, bullying and sexual harassment. The recent exclusive in The Guardian of a linked letter sent to David Williams, Permanent Secretary, by 60 female members of the MOD Civil Service, which talked about a toxic and hostile culture in the MOD. The linked letter apparently says, was spoken over during meetings, was subject to pejorative language, we receive unwanted attention and face sexual harassment, including intrusive staring, sexualized comments, running commentary about what we wear, how we look, how we smell. Claims a group of military officers kept an Excel spreadsheet that rated women based on their looks and what they thought they'd be like in bed. Your Rusi land warfare speech says, to put it simply, you don't have to be laddish to be lethal. In a scrap, you have to truly trust those on your left and right. What can we do? How can we solve this perennial problem? I mean, I'm former Army. All of this was happening when I was commissioned 45 years ago. It's still happening now. What can we do?
I mean, the first thing, so I know the authors, or the people who coordinated the letter. I work very closely with them in the MOD. When I was last here 6 or 7 years ago, and we reflected together on how disappointing it is that the culture, if anything, the culture they describe has got worse from what we were experiencing together back then. So it is. I mean, it is clearly utterly unacceptable. It's disgraceful, and I'm deeply ashamed and angry that women who work in the MOD and in this building experience those sort of behaviours. It's just not on. I think this is a cultural issue, and we know that changing culture is a very, very long-term process. I think we can point to a variety of interventions and initiatives that we've made. I can talk authoritatively about what we've done in the Army, but they're right across defence. And I think we can see, with this notable exception, this tells us that we haven't still got it right, that there have been significant improvements. We draw from society. We would like to represent the breadth of society as much as we can. And there is no getting away from the fact that people that we bring into the armed forces, whether they are civil servants, whether they're reserves, or whether they're regulars, are often habituated or almost normalized with these sort of behaviors. So we know from Ofsted that 90% of young girls are exposed to unwanted sexual content at school, 50% of boys are the same. The rates of sexual offending and sexual abuse in the UK have gone up very, very significantly. That's, I hope, a function of better reporting and better investigating. But nevertheless, that is the society that we draw from. And so what we seek to do is to take those those societal norms and re-educate, accustom people to the fact that we are different from the rest of society. That the work that we do, the sort of roles that we perform, means that you've got to have teams that are diverse, because we know that diverse teams perform significantly better, and there's so much evidence to back that up, but also inclusive. And above all, given the dangerous roles that we perform, if teams aren't cohesive, if you don't have mutual trust, if people aren't bringing their very best qualities to their job, then you're not going to perform. And for us in the British Army, that comes down to the values and standards, which is not a gender thing. It is a set of values that we espouse and we try to live up to. I think that we have seen a marked difference in the Army from when I joined close to 40 years ago to where we are now. But as this evidence points to, and there's plenty more, what Mike Wigston highlighted, what Sarah Atherton highlighted, we know that there are still pockets of behaviour, sometimes quite large pockets, judging by this, that are just utterly unacceptable. So it's a constant effort.
Have you recently ever seen any of this behaviour sort of firsthand? I mean, maybe at the sort of the lower end of the spectrum, if I can say that, women being talked over in meetings, and have you ever had to call it out?
Yes, I have. I mean, I'm not going to personalise it.
No.
But I've seen it at almost every level, and I've tried to be an active bystander. It's certainly the active bystander training that I've had, and we try to give as many people as possible, as I think really helpful, because it gives people tools. It makes them realise what they're seeing, and then the importance of the responsibility and the role that they play in calling it out. But there's also just something about instinctively knowing what's right and what's wrong. So yes, I mean, constantly. And some of these sort of unconscious biases, I've had as well. So I've benefited massively from reverse mentoring and having interventions, either publicly through someone being an active bystander or through coaching afterwards, makes you realise that sometimes you do talk over people. You don't create the space for people in a meeting to talk for themselves. And so you need to give the people the tools to overcome those unconscious biases.
Okay. That kind of sort of segues quite neatly into zero tolerance. So the armed forces have a policy of zero tolerance. I mean, I find it a bit of a confusing area. And I watched the HCDC Women in Defence Forces evidence last week. Against this background of zero tolerance, what I'm confused about is the seemingly large burden of responsibility placed on the person making the complaint. Because if they pursue it, does that mean that someone will automatically lose their job, lose their career? The panel giving evidence talked about criminal and sub-threshold activity. I mean, are you able to sort of almost set my worries about the victim and the responsibility on them at rest a little?
Yeah, we were talking about this before, weren't we? So there are certain categories where it's really clear-cut, where there is a policy of mandatory discharge. It's around sexual offences. It's around relationships between trainers and instructors and trainees. There, it's mandatory discharge. Where there is a presumption of discharge is around the area that you described, which is sort of unacceptable behaviours, and also a separate category, which is sexual exploitation and abuse. And we have consciously chosen, and this is an evolving policy. So first of all, we don't have all the data. So we've been at this for about a year now. We don't have enough data to make really sound judgments, and that will be important. And secondly, like all good policy, it will evolve. So the more we learn, the more we can tweak and refine the policy. So I will be the first to admit at the moment that I don't think we've got it perfectly right, but I'm also confident that it'll get better and better and more focused. But what you're referring to is that we have consciously taken the choice to make this victim-led. That is a conscious choice. I've been involved in some judgments at a more senior level where the judgment that we have made as a panel has exceeded what the victim wanted. And a concern I have following instances like that is that it might it cause victims not to come forward.
Mhm.
So it's not simple. I think that, I don't know. So this is instinctive, but my instinctive think is that I think victims who express a preference for this to be resolved at a lower threshold do so in complete sincerity. There will be some cases, I'm sure, where people might feel some peer pressure or don't want to rock the boat, as it were. But that is the risk that you carry with it being victim-led. So the key for me is, if we do go through judgments where an individual who's been complained about is retained, there'll be some sanction, but is retained. The most important thing is to then track their behaviour and track their progress over the next 2 or 3 years, because you don't get a second chance.
Mhm. So 2 strikes and you're out.
Yeah. I mean, that would be my instinct. So I'm not sure that's absolute policy, but that would be absolutely my expectation.
Okay. At the same HCDC session, General Sharon talked about an uncomfortable home truth, that people are anxious reporting things to their chain of command. Now, it's very easy to feel isolated and scared if you've been the victim of unwanted and wrong behaviour. But the perception could be that chain of command won't take you seriously. What other initiatives have been put in place should women wish to raise a concern or report something other than just their chain of command?
So there's a variety of different routes, and I mean, I don't have the exact data to hand, but we'll ensure that it's posted after this. There's a variety of different routes that give people the option, if they're not comfortable reporting it in the chain of command, and I understand sometimes that's the case, then they've got a variety of different routes that they can take, whether they're helplines, they're different tacks that you can take. And of course, when it comes to service complaints, we now have central admissibility. So we've removed the burden of judgment from the chain of command around some of these complaints, so that there isn't a perception that they're being nipped in the bud locally.
One of the things I remember when I was still serving was the presumption that if there was anything like this in say an infantry battalion, and it involved say AGC SBS, so in a corps embedded in that it was always the woman that moved. Is that, it was never the man that was at fault, it was always the woman that moved. Have we come a long way from?
I would expect so.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, that would be wrong.
It was wrong then. It was wrong then. And I, as Commander SBS, I didn't always agree with it or make it happen. Could we move on to recruitment and attraction? So how do the armed forces repair the relationship with the public after shocking incidents like the death of Jaisley Beck or the recent Red Arrows?
So I think we can take some encouragement. YouGov polling tells us that about 77% of the public think that the army or the armed forces are an attractive and inclusive employer. So there are really positive, broader societal trends where people recognise that the army is open to, all roles are open to women in the army, for example. That people have a positive experience. So there's a broader trend where public's perception of how women are treated and given opportunities in the armed forces is positive. But none of that detracts from or should divert us from the very, very high profile and deeply concerning incidents like Olivia Perks, like Gunnar Beck. And I can't talk about the detail of Gunnar Beck because we're still waiting for the coroner's inquest. I can talk about what we've learned from Olivia Perks. Somewhat uniquely, there were no interventions directed by the coroner. That is almost unique. And that was a reflection of the the hugely significant programme of transformation that we've intervened and conducted at the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst. And then what we're learning at Sandhurst, we're extending to the Soldier Academy, to NCO's academies, and through the whole of the army. But we let Olivia Perks down, desperately badly. We cannot afford to allow anything like that to ever happen again.
What do you see as the modern draw for women to join the army in 2023? And by the way, the new "You Belong Here," I knew it's early days, but does that seem to be landing?
It is. So the positive, so the first figures, and it's a bit too early to tell. I mean, the campaign was only, it's an extension of existing set of campaigns. But this one was launched in September, and the early data is very encouraging. We are facing some quite stiff headwinds just in terms of demographics. So there's about 11 million people in the UK between the age of 17 and 30 who are eligible to join. Of those, really only about 2 million are actually capable of joining. And that figure will go down by 100,000 in 2028. We know that there's very high levels of employment. We know that people's awareness of what happens in the armed forces is no longer what it used to be. And we're not alone in this. Almost all Western armies, navies and air forces are struggling with the employment market. So to be able to perform well in those conditions is quite encouraging. And it's particularly encouraging when it's come to women, because the message "you belong here" is overcoming what occupational psychologists would describe as women's more cautious approach. Men will often bid for a job which they may not be qualified to do. Women are more cautious, and if they don't either see themselves in the role or themselves having the skills, then will be less likely to apply. And so a series of interventions we're making to change those perceptions, also to help women prepare physically and mentally before they get into the training pipeline. And the message of the campaign, which is, you belong here, and here could be anywhere. It could be in a field hospital, it could be in an infantry platoon, it could be in an armored vehicle, it could be on a gun line. And the signs are that if we can deliver on those initial expressions of interest and applications, we will get to the targets that we've set ourselves, and then begin to get to that catalytic critical mass point of, ideally, most organizations say it's about 30%, which is why the 30 by 30 aspiration, level of ambition is so important.
Okay, I'll come back to that if I may. But talking about awareness, I've got the privilege of reading the citations of all of our nominees, and their stories are incredible. And I would love to get their stories out there more. I mean, do you think that defence makes enough of the role models we have? Do you think we should be doing more? Maybe we should have, I don't know, maybe there is a common strategy just to get the stories out there of the incredible work that people in defence do.
I mean, the fact you're asking probably tells us that we're not. I mean, you think we're not. There's an element of people's personal choice. We've got some amazing role models, particularly senior role models in the army. But these are people who got there on merit. For no other reason.
Mm-hmm.
They're in those posts because they got there on merit.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they prefer simply to be seen as someone who got there on merit as opposed to being a role model. So there's an element of people's choice. So I think you've got to work with those, those inspiring characters, those inspiring women who are out there. But I don't think it's something you can force on them.
I would say probably from my side of the fence, I'd say as a role model, they have a responsibility. As female role models, they have a responsibility. But that's that's a discussion.
Yeah, but I think it's how you exercise that responsibility, and it may not be in the public way that you describe.
Okay.
And I think many of them are, go beyond any level of normal responsibility or duty in what they do to help mentor and bring on others. And the results are extraordinary. So women now are disproportionately more likely to promote, to be selected for command positions. The last command board that we had in the army, against a sort of 11-12% level of women in the army, 25% selected as commanding officers. And they got there on the merit, but they also got there because those role models above them had been helping them as well.
Okay. So I interviewed Major General Tom Buick at DSCI on army recruiting. It was a really good interview. I mean, his commitment to recruitment and improving the stats and so on shone through. You talked about a level of ambition of 30% by 2030. Is that still the Army's level of ambition?
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's important to be clear about what we mean. So this is going to sound like me weasel wording. So we will. So the level of ambition by 2030 is incredibly important because it is an aspiration. It sets a target. It sets a goal. It tells us what we should be aiming for. Our ability to deliver that from where we are at the moment and with the commercial contracts we have is probably beyond us. So the target, not ambition, the target that we will set is 20% by 2030.
Okay.
But you can hold those two things in your head at the same time.
Yeah.
You can, because what you're trying to say to the wider organization is for the really significant change that we want, both in the culture of the organization, but also the representation, our ability to draw on much wider talent from across society and the population, depends on us getting to a critical mass of about 30%. That's what we should be aiming for. We may not get there in exactly that time frame, but that's our target. Sorry, our ambition.
Your ambition. Your ambition. Target also has a harder edge to it. So
it does. Yeah.
20% actually by 2030 is a great target.
Yeah.
Yeah. Targets get investment. Targets get measured.
Yeah.
Okay. I'd like to move on to a theme from the Defence Command paper, which was released this year. The command paper puts people front and centre. It says defence isn't already an environment where talent thrives and where careers are nurtured, and we will make sure this remains the case. Diverse teams are stronger, more innovative, and less prone to groupthink. And just going back to your land warfare speech of last year, you used a glorious quote from the then Brigadier Bernard Montgomery. We've got to develop new methods and learn a new technique. There is no need to continue doing a thing merely because it's been done in the army for the last 30 or 40 years. If this is the only reason for doing it, it's high time we changed it and did something else. And you went on to say in your speech, I'm prepared to look again at the structure of the army. If we judge the revised structures will make the army better prepared to fight in Europe, then we will follow Monty's advice and do something else. Does the structure of the army include a look at the diversity of boards, such as ECAB?
So ECAB is about 30 to 40% female.
Really? And is that because people filling the roles in ECAB happen to be women, or have you brought in NEDs?
I brought in non-execs.
Wonderful.
I did the same thing when I was at Strategic Command. So the balance, I had more female non-execs in Strategic Command. The composition of the NEDs goes up and down a little bit, but I select NEDs on the basis of their experience. But there are areas where I very consciously would take positive action because I know that because we are bottom fed, and the number of women coming through into senior roles, as you can see, is a growing trend.
Mm-hmm.
But for as long as we don't quite have that diversity, I'll pull on other levers to make sure that we do.
And do you see that diversity of thinking in action? Are you avoiding groupthink, which is the risk of a lack of diversity?
I hope so. I mean, there is always a risk in any institution for groupthink. So our non-execs are very powerful at challenging that, but quite often the challenge comes from within as well. And so it feels to me like a board, because it has got a more diverse balance and representation in it, balanced background, balance if you come from the army, a balance of experience. It feels like a very rich arena for discussion, and there is legitimate challenge that comes in.
That's so good to hear. It is so
it's
good
not
to
perfect.
No.
And I'm sure that, and I try to, so first of all, when you're chairing any meeting, first thing you have in your mind is, are we going to finish on time? Because people have busy lives. So you've got to make sure that you're balancing you're running in a way that you talked about earlier on, make sure that everybody feels able to contribute. And I hope we do.
Could we move to the Haythornthwaite review, which looked at ways to attract and retain next generations to the armed forces? 67 recommendations. Fluid spectrum of service is one thing I'd like to just explore a tiny bit, which allows everyone to serve in a much wider range of ways, recognising that personnel want differing levels of control over their lives at different times. One of the things that I ask virtually every person that sits in that chair is, do you see the differing levels of control that might come in to include an increase to the current level of paternity leave and paternity pay? The armed forces arguably are falling behind the rest of the UK, where we've got big firms like John Lewis, Aviva, who have equalised paternity leave and pay, maternity leave and pay, surrogacy and adoption leave and pay.
So this is a defence policy. Indeed, it's a government policy. So we, as you know, in the Ministry of Defence, along with other government departments, we do what the government's specified paternity leave allocation is, and we don't go beyond that. If there is a discussion about going further, I'm not party to it. So we're essentially complying with what the rest of government and the public sector do.
Okay. Do you see the benefits, though, of perhaps going further on paternity leave, of equalising childcare arrangements?
I do. I'm half Norwegian. It's very different.
Yeah.
I grew up there. It's I have a very large family over there. It's very different. But the army is, so we are the most deployed of the services around the world. We are the most productive army in Europe. Mm-hmm. We're delivering outputs that we were delivering in 2012, so the same level of commitments, and we are 25% smaller from then. And the effect of that is that people are often meeting themselves coming back from deployments. And without reducing the demand, and there is no sense that the level of crises that we've got around the world, or indeed the government's aspiration, is going to reduce the demand, then we need to continue to service those. And that means that sometimes you don't always have the luxury of being able to take on. I don't know how much of the workforce would be away. I can't put a figure on it, mm-hmm. But Stuart, instinctively, there are going to be fewer people available for deployments, and that's going to put more pressure on those who are. So, if I could have a bigger army, then that might be the quid pro quo.
I don't think we can help with that unless we can recruit more women. But yes, that wouldn't necessarily. What about the take-up of the flexible working, alternative working arrangements? We know that women like them. What about men? Have they been taken up by men?
Well, they have a bit, but okay. I'd be bluffing. I don't want to bluff.
Last question for me, then I'm going to go to some questions from the audience. HCDC session. Minister Murison was incredibly positive about the future for women. And I'm going to read a bit of the transcript. I'm absolutely convinced that I have seen the future, and the future is female. Throughout defence, we see that women are being advanced. I would like to see that rate of advancement accelerated, but nevertheless, we're now seeing generals, admirals, and air marshals being appointed. Even more importantly than that, we're seeing women commanding brigades, women commanding significant platforms, seeing women going through the gateways to the stars, which are our big forces, higher command, RCDS. These are the leaders of the future. I mean, what's your commander's assessment? Do you think the future is female?
Well, I think the future's a lot more balanced than it is at the moment.
Okay.
But I think, I kind of agree with what Andrew Murison was saying there. You look at those promotion statistics I was talking about earlier on. You look at the proportion of increasingly visible women in critical roles at the top of the army, and it doesn't just inspire other women. I think it inspires men. And they are brilliant leaders. They are there because they are very, very good at their jobs. So if that's the case, off the back of all of those prohibitive, those obstacles that we have placed in the way of women over through the course of my career, we've still got that, then the trend line can only go in one direction, which is more and more talented women, now that we've removed so many of those obstacles, then in 20 or 30 years' time, I'd be astonished if it wasn't, much, much higher levels of representation. And I mean, it can only be a matter of time, and possibly not that much time, before a woman is sitting in my job.
It's been a wish of mine for God knows how many years to actually have a female mother
I'm
of
sorry.
CGS. But I'm going to go to some questions from the audience now, and these are ones that have been sent in advance. And forgive me if I start looking at my phone, because we're getting some in from Q&A as well. This one has come from a member of the Army, and you and I have chatted in the past about, does the Army value women as women? And it's linked to what Minister Mewson was talking about. There's been considerable research completed with the Army on neurodiversity and how females' brains function differently to males. It's also evident that women don't achieve as many of the higher ranks in the Army as their male counterparts, although it is improving. Please, could you tell us how the Army is using this information to progress its methods of selection and assessment, OJR, SJR, ICSC reports, etc., to ensure that those that are more conscientious, reserved, humble, and analytical are equally as valued and fairly reported on as those with more dominant male traits?
Yeah. So, so first of all, I think, as we were talking about, I think the trend line is very significantly improving. When I look at the women I work with at quite senior levels, I don't see male behaviour. I don't see testosterone loaded, dominant, loud people. I see people who are all those things that the question described: thoughtful, analytical, rigorous, but they're also incredibly inspiring. And I mean, I'd double down on the points that the question was making. Women think differently. They have a different perspective. They tend to contribute to much more cohesive teams, whether they're all female or whether they're mixed teams. And on operations, they have a perspective and access and understanding that is invaluable, that men don't have. And in places like Africa and in the Middle East and Afghanistan, that made a massive difference. So first of all, I value women as soldiers. That's what I need from them most, whether they're soldiers or officers. Mm-hmm. Their skills, their professional skills, their mental acuity, their ability to take decisions, to get orders done, to use their initiative. Those are the qualities that I need most. But over and above that, women have qualities that men don't. And so I absolutely value them as women. The question about the selection of the boards, we've implemented a number of policy changes that first and foremost have removed obstacles, particularly around maternity leave, around losing seniority because you've lost time, losing opportunities because you've lost time. Those have all gone. So women can be a mother and then can come back into their career and not have been disadvantaged. And that is fundamentally the right thing to do. We constantly review how we conduct boards and selections. If you ask external auditors, people who look at how we select people, they will say it is amongst the best in the business. So I'm confident that broadly speaking, our career management approaches are pretty good, but it doesn't mean that we don't constantly challenge them. Increasingly, we're now opening up fields where everybody, this is under Project Castle, everybody can apply for a job through an app. So you can build a field that way. We don't require qualifications or experience in the way that we used to, where some women have been able to. And increasingly, particularly at senior levels, we're interviewing for roles as well. So policy doesn't stand still. We are constantly trying to learn. And the sort of transformation that we're doing up in Glasgow at the Army Personnel Centre should accelerate a lot of these trends.
In fact, what Minister Mewson went on to say is to talk about psychometric testing and the fact that I would have hated to do psychometric testing as part of my advancement boards. They do it now. I can tell you that women score higher for leadership and intellect than men do.
And we have 180 and 360-degree reporting as well, which gives you a more holistic picture.
Question from someone in defence industry. What do you think someone outside the defence sector might be surprised to know about working in defence?
because I don't sit outside defence, so I don't know what his perspective would be. I think, so for me, I mean, the reason that I've stayed in the army for as long as I have has been almost exclusively because I just love spending time with soldiers. We're the leading apprentice employer in the UK for the third year running. I mean, that's an amazing achievement. We take people from extraordinarily underprivileged backgrounds. 30% of those who turn up at the Army Foundation College at Harrogate have been excluded from school. They all leave with a GCSE in English, and 90% leave with a GCSE in maths. We're an extraordinary engine of social mobility. The vast majority of service leavers leave better, leave well, contribute to society. And for people from those unpromising backgrounds, then perform, it still moves me, perform astonishingly well and heroically on the operations that we send them on. So if you don't know the quality of our people and what we do for and to our people through that process is absolutely transformative.
I've got another one from industry. Like all armed services, there is an array of strategic partners and contractors supporting the armed forces. How do you propose to ensure that those organisations hold gender equity as a priority and deliver on such? Do you do any compliance checks?
Didn't understand the question, sorry.
So it's really, are you checking that contractors who work for the armed forces, work for the army, are also as diverse as they could be and hold gender equity as important?
I'd be astonished if they weren't. I spent more time visiting factories than I have foxholes because we need to regrow our industrial base. And all of the parts of defence industry I've gone to, whether they are large factories or whether they're small SMEs, have certainly taken at face value, looked pretty diverse to me. There's a flip side to that question, which is that industry is prioritizing ESG. And some companies' interpretation of ESG means not working with defence. And that for me is strategically foolhardy. It appears to judge that defence is not, that there is no moral imperative to defence, that defence isn't a necessary function, it isn't a worthy profession, that the idea that soldiers, sailors and airmen or aviators laying their lives down for their country isn't something to be celebrated, and equipping them to defend their country isn't the right thing to do. So I don't know in the contractual process the answer to that question. I've seen for myself that, broadly speaking, defence industry looks fairly diverse to me, but I think industry more broadly has a responsibility to make sure that we're investing in this country's defence, and they have a part in it.
I know occasionally if I'm on a panel, I'll be asked, why work in defence? I mean, if you are in defence industry or in the armed forces, if you're an engineer, the range of equipment you can work on it can't be better anywhere, and you're defending the nation.
Yeah.
There's real reason for doing it. Question from the Army. What would you like to see the Army achieve in the next 5 years in terms of its gender equality strategy?
I'd like to achieve the targets that we've set ourselves.
Okay.
So I'd like to get sure that we've got 20% by 2030. I mean, that would be a good start.
Have you any other sort of targets that are perhaps not as well known?
So I'm going to answer the question in a different way. I was asked when I appeared in front of HCDC the other day, what was it in terms of workforce that worried me the most? And it's the reserves. Because it's an old truism that regular armies start wars, reserves, citizen armies end. And the trajectory of our reserves is not going in the direction that we need it to. We need to ensure that as we look at, the next decade, which looks extraordinarily dangerous, we have got the reserve that the country needs and indeed the country deserves. The thing about the reserves is often got much better gender balance and gender diversity than the regulars do. So I would like to see, and we're lucky enough to have Major General Mark Lancaster now as Director of Reserves, who spent his entire career serving regularly, despite a pretty significant other career, to turn that around.
How would you describe your style of leadership?
Servant.
Can you expand on that?
So I was, as you said from my bio, I was lucky enough to join a regiment, Green Jackets, now the Rifles, where there was a presumption of equality amongst all ranks within a clearly defined hierarchy, but that everybody had something to the party. The idea that everybody had something to say and everybody's ideas and opinions mattered. Now, some of them could be a little bit random from time to time, but broadly speaking, that spirit of equality is something that's always stuck with me. The idea that I'm not more important than you, but you're no more important than me. And I think that's a very, very powerful way of thinking about how you build inclusive teams, diverse teams. You allow people to contribute, and it's something that I've always tried to get after.
One from industry. No women have been seen around negotiation tables for any of the current conflicts in the world. Why do you think that is, and what message do you think that sends?
I haven't seen the makeup of the negotiating teams because so much is being done, particularly with the Gaza conflicts, being done in secret. So I simply don't know. I think we can point to very, very powerful stateswomen who have made a profound difference certainly through the course of my career, whether they're political leaders. I've just come back from a visit to Pakistan, a high commissioner out there, is a woman, and I was speaking to the army chief, and Pakistan is a male-dominated society. Their army has plenty of women in it, but it's quite coded male. But the impact that she's having out there is drawing huge amounts of respect from Pakistanis. So I'm not sure I entirely recognise the characterisation.
Forgive me for looking at my phone, everyone. I'm not texting. I'm just getting some questions in. Supporting women through their careers is fantastic. But how do you support dual working families, military and non-military? That's come in from industry.
So we've got wraparound childcare, haven't we? Which has made a big difference. It probably doesn't go quite as far as we would want it to, but it's a really, really promising start. We've certainly attended to ensuring that where you've got two serving partners, that we're not putting them in a position where they both, particularly when they've got children, where they both have to deploy against their will. So we're making life easier. I'm not sure that it may well be a question for how we think about Haythornthwaite and the ability to do zigzag careers, that we do need to take account of looking more broadly. So if you've got someone in defence industry and someone in defence, that you take a more holistic view. I think I'd probably be bluffing if I tried to go further than saying that at the moment I don't think we do, but we might need to.
The two serving partners one actually is music to my ears. I was one of the very first mothers to rejoin when the rules changed a long time ago, and married to army, and that was our biggest concern, that we'd both be deployed at the same time. So that's definitely music to my ears. You mentioned it takes time for culture change. How can you ensure focus is kept on the need for change and other priorities don't get in the way?
I don't think that's an issue. I think that the recognition for climate change has now become so much, sorry, climate change, culture change, has become so much embedded in army leadership at every level that this feels as a direction, it feels irreversible to me. I mean, the obvious thing to point to by way of deliberate interventions is our programme that gets after the Army's organisational culture, and that's Operation Teamwork. And that was laid out at an international conference recently, about 28 participating nations, and universally, the academics there, the scientists there, and the other military thought it was probably the best practice they had seen in terms of driving cultural change. The whole of the army stops on a day. We look at, we facilitate discussions that genuinely feel the feedback we get as if they are changing the dial in terms of culture down at the lowest levels of teams all the way up to the highest. And it's not just one day a year, it carries on. So, the evidence and external judgment is that this is a really good program. So we'll stick with it.
So I'm going to say thank you very much. Although actually, no, before we do that, Scotch eggs. What is it with Scotch eggs?
I mean, who would take a hard-boiled egg, wrap it up in sausage meat, and then deep fry it? I mean, it's disgusting.
You could be making enemies out there of people who love Scotch eggs.
I'm way past that.
Thank you. Thank you to Lara and Newton Europe, our Pankhurst Challenge partner. An enormous thank you to you, Patrick, for taking time out of what I know is a horrendously busy time of year for you.
Thanks, Patrick.
This is the last of our challenge interviews for 2023. If you'd like us to interview someone in 2024, drop us a line. We're very open to ideas. But thank you, everyone. And see you next year. Bye now.
Thanks, Angela.